Okay, so shall we begin?
We can begin the very last case that we're going to see now. Joseph Maitri, a blind man.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay, so we begin. Joseph Macreed belonged to the middle class of society and enjoyed a modest income that protected him from need. His parents provided him with a good education and meant for him to go into business. However, at age 20, he lost his sight. He died in 1845 when he was almost 50. Around 10 years prior to his death, he was struck with a second infirmity that left him completely deaf. Thus, he could only relate to the world of the living through the sense of touch. Not being able to see was in itself very hard, but not being able to hear was double torture. Having at first enjoyed all his faculties, he felt even more the result of this twofold privation. What could he have done to deserve such a cruel fate? It was not his last existence, for he had always displayed exemplary conduct. He was a good son with a gentle and benevolent character, and when he found that he had been deprived of hearing, he accepted the new trial with resignation. One never heard him utter a single complaint. His speech displayed perfect lucidity of spirit and an uncommon intelligence. A person who had known him thought that useful instruction might be received by talking with his spirit. He was evoked, and the following communication was received in response to the questions addressed to him.
Thank you. Okay, so here we have a case of Mr. Joseph Maitre that was was not poor. Says that here she was kind of middle class, was not excessively rich as well, but had everything that he needed. Had good parents that provide him with good education, and he seems to be making good use of all of those talents being placed, all those instruments being placed in his hand for his growth. At age 20, due to some kind of disease, he becomes blind, which is already in itself a big blow. If you are,
Mm-hmm.
if we are born blind, it's not easy, but it's a whole lot easier because there is no sense of lost, right? If you never saw light in your life, you're not gonna miss it because you never had it to begin with. To become blind at the age of 20, yet we already went to school, already got an education, and become blind is in itself a pretty big blow. But with resignation and hard work, you can do the things that will help your brain to accommodate and exponentially augment all of the senses. So a blind person has many times better sense of smell, of addiction, of tactile than someone who has good visions, right? I remember case of the documentary of the blind skiers. How the blind person skis is beyond me. I can ski with my good eyes, but they are able to, by smelling the snow, to know where they are. If they are in the East Coast, they're on the West Coast. If they are in Colorado, or if they are in Washington D.C., in Washington State, by sense of the smell of the snow. Now, for us who have good eyesight, most of us cannot distinguish the smell of snow. This oh, snow is snow. It smells like snow or has no smell. A blind man is able to sense the difference of smell of snow. That is how augmented all the senses become. So, assuming that he did everything, and apparently he did everything, to augment his other senses, especially the hearing, the audition. And he accommodated himself, blind. But 20 years later, based 20 years later, another disease gets him and he loses his sense of hearing as well.
Mm.
So now it's more than a double blow. It's exponentially worse now. Perhaps the
Mm.
most important sense they had to overcome the vision deficit, that is also gone. And it says over here the only way to associate with individuals now to be to touching, right?
Yes.
It says right there. So this is a
My.
very difficult trial. Very difficult trial for someone who had seen the light, had vision, was able to go to school, becomes blind, do everything that you can do to compensate that with other senses, and then you lose another sense. It's not an easy thing to do.
No.
There got to be not only reasons, but objectives of why that happened to people, why did it happen to him and not to me and not to Mary next door.
Mm-hmm.
There got to be some explanation to this, right? And that's what a person that know him was interested in knowing. And 10 years after his death, he died on the spiritual world and was able to provide the communication.
Yes.
Any question, comments?
Mm.
Okay, so let's continue.
Okay. Paris, 1863. My friends, I thank you for having remembered me. Although maybe you would not have even thought of me if you hadn't expected to reap some benefit from my communication. Nonetheless, I know that your motives are authentic. Thus, I am pleased to have answered your call, and since I have been allowed to do so, I am happy to be able to serve for your instruction. May my example add to the many proofs that spirits have provided to regarding the justice of God.
Thank you.
You knew, okay.
Okay. So in the very simple statement, he pretty much declares himself. What kind of spirit is this? Okay, he says that intellectually, he is well capable when he states that I'm grateful that you remembered me. Although I understand that it's not me itself as the person, as the spirit, that is the main interest of yours, but it's my case, my history. And I am glad to communicate with you because your intentions are authentic. And I am glad to have the opportunity to participate in your education, describing to you my personal history.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. We'll continue. You knew me to be blind and deaf, and you have asked yourselves what I had done to deserve such a fate. I am going to tell you. First of all, it was the second time that I was deprived of sight. During my previous existence at the beginning of the last century, I went blind at 30 years of age due to excesses of all kinds, which ruined my health and weakened my organs. I was already a, I was already a punishment for having abused the gifts I received from Providence, for I was very talented. But instead of realizing the fact that I was the original cause of my infirmity, I accused that same Providence, in whom I believed very little anyway. I blasphemed against God. I denied him and accused him by saying that if he did not actually exist, then he must be unjust and evil for making his creatures suffer as I did. On the contrary, I should have considered myself fortunate because, unlike so many other unfortunate blind people, I didn't have to beg for my bread. But no, I only thought about myself and about the privations that had been imposed on me. Under the control of such ideas and due to my lack of faith, I became cantankerous, and demanding. In other words, unbearable to those who were close to me. From then on, life was purposeless. I couldn't think of the future except as criminal. After futilely exhausting all the resources of science and realizing that my healing was impossible, I decided to end it all. I committed suicide. Upon my, okay,
Thank you.
continue.
Yeah, no, thank you. Let's take a break.
Uh-huh.
So here he started to tell his story that in his previous existence he also became blind, but in the different circumstances. His blindness in the previous existence was due to excesses of all sort, I mentioned over here. So it's his own fault, no, self-imposed. He created that for himself and became extremely rebellious, angry, revolted towards something that he'd have done to himself. And of course, as commonly we do, blamed someone else. If you don't have anybody else that you can blame, then you blame God. That's what we do very often as well. And in his state of rebelliousness, when he finally understood there was no way to regain his vision, life lost all value to him and he committed suicide, which is now a much greater fault, is a double fault that he committed there, right? So his, so I put over here to question. Of course, we understand that when we create those situations for ourselves due to our excesses, due to our behavior, we compromise our perispirit. We compromise the perispirit that is associated with that part of the physical body related with the illness, right? So I, of course, on the question mark, my personal understanding this matter is that he wasn't able to, after received the gift of the blindness, to kind of be an instrument for him to stop with the excesses, to him to reflect a little bit more upon himself, relationship with our God, our Father. He went the other way around. He make even worse. No, it's like giving a good instrument in your hand for you to do something good, then you choose to do something to compromise yourself even more. So he aggravated his own situation and he aggravated his own bad spirit. That instrument could be an instrument for him to heal himself, not save his vision on that existence, but go back with the spiritual world in much better shape and perhaps with a healed bad spirit, which he did was the opposite, with his rebelliousness and culminated with even worse, with committing suicide. He now has very strong disease, so to say, in his body spirit, that regardless, he would have a complicated next physical life. He would have some defects on his physical body. Since vision, the loss of vision, was the main cause of his rebelliousness, it is understandable that in this existence, he would, the following existence, he would also have to deal with problems with the visions, perhaps become blind again. Okay, comments?
I've got a question.
Sure.
No, it's just more of a clarification because I'm ignorant on the subject. So, aside from an accident to the vision, how can one abuse something at physical level and become blind?
Mhm.
Because I understand alcohol, understand eating, understand drugs, doing all kind of crazy stuff with our body, but the the, the vision and the hearing is kind of a tricky for me.
Yeah, the main cause of blindness in the United States is diabetes. And the main cause of diabetes in this country is excesses. Is excess of food, basically. It's overeating and excess of laziness, not doing anything that you become diabetic, and then you do not treat your diabetic, you allow you live with very high uh, blood glucose, and high glucose is acid, so to say, in your vessels. It's bad for everything. It damages everything. So the main cause of blindness in the United States is diabetes, and diabetes is very common, very often comes from our excesses. When well controlled, you're not going to lose your vision. But if you continue committing the excesses and maintain a very high blood glucose, you end up uh, blind. But as I said, alcohol also affects the blood vessels and affects the retina, could cause blindness. So there is many ways that God provides us instruments for us to take care of ourselves and stop committing the same mistakes. Okay, and I see diabetes being the first one, the alarm go on off, stop what you're doing, take care of it, and if you don't, it's gonna get worse. You don't you don't stop, continue to get worse, end up blind, end up losing your kidneys, end up being on hemodialysis, and so forth and so on. So yeah, there is many ways that you can commit excesses that leads to blindness.
Doesn't syphilis cause blindness also, if not treated?
Mostly the syphilis mostly is in the young, right? Is when the baby passes through the birth canal that is filled with syphilis, so to say. But yeah, it could also.
Because you have to think that this is 1700 probably or something like that. So there was no treatment for any excesses, and you would think that the light at night was difficult to see. So he combined an effort to look at things. I don't know. I'm just thinking here out loud.
Yeah, well, most blindness, syphilis-associated blindness is of the newborn. Is when they got disease passing to the birth canal.
Okay.
Thanks, guys.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Upon my awakening at last, I found myself immersed in the same darkness I had been in during life. However, it didn't take long to understand that I did not belong to the corporeal world, but that I was now a blind spirit. Life beyond the grave was thus a reality. I tried in vain to escape from it, to plunge myself into nothingness, but ended up simply clashing with the void. If this life were eternal, as I had heard, would I be then in this situation for the rest of eternity? That thought was dreadful. I wasn't suffering, but to describe the anguish and torment of my spirit is impossible. How long did it last? I don't know, but it seemed so very, very long. Exhausted and weary, a change finally came over me. I understood that a higher power was weighing down on me, and I told myself that if this power could oppress me, it could also comfort me, and so I begged for mercy. As I prayed and as my fervor increased, something told me that my cruel situation would have an end. The light was finally dawned, and my rapture was boundless at beholding the heavenly brightness. I could perceive benevolently smiling spirits, those who surrounded me, as well as those who harbored radiantly in space. I wanted to follow them, but an invisible force held me back. Then one of them said to me, "The God whom you used to deny has noticed your return to him and has allowed us to restore your sight. But you have yield only because of constraint and exhaustion. If from now on you want to share in the bliss that we enjoy here, you must prove the sincerity of your repentance and good sentiments by recommencing your earthly trial under conditions that will expose you to falling again into the same wrongs. For this new trial will be even harsher than the last. I eagerly accept it, promising not to fail again.
Go.
Okay.
So after suicide, surprise, surprise, he finds himself in the same situation that he was in his physical life. He continues to be blind, and in many cases that you say the physical body is sick, not the spirit. Here is a case where the spirit is sick. The spirit is in a state of blindness, in blindness towards God, in blindness towards the divine laws. Is completely in darkness towards goodness. So here the spirit is blind. And as I said before, since it was caused through himself, it is up to himself to remove that blindness from him. He caused it. He received the necessary instruments to get rid of it himself. And in the state of blindness, stays in the beginning, the state of rebelliousness. Eventually, as often happens, as often is being explained to us, exhausted and unwary. When probably he reached his bottom, he finally understood that a higher power was weighing down on me. And I told myself that if this power could oppress me, it could also comfort me. So I begged for mercy. So is what we say very often. You have to kind of go on to the bottom of our suffering before we realize that we really humbled enough to ask for help, to pray sincerely and to ask for help. Even if we ask for help with an ulterior motive, it's as long as it's sincere, you're still going to be helped. So he went to the 3 hours, or the 2 hours at least, right? He repented and he prayed. He prayed very with sincerity, and he was assisted. He heard a voice, and his vision was restored, and he could see those illuminated beings, and he wanted to follow them. Who wouldn't, right? But he was denied it, and he was given an opportunity to return to to the physical existence in a next reincarnation, in which you would have to go through um, not only the same challenges, but even more severe challenges, as we know he did. And at this time, he accepted whatever he needs to go through eagerly, as I say over here. Something's important here. Yeah, yeah, he says over here that I was suffering, but to describe the anguish and torment of my spirit is impossible. As we have seen in many cases, there are no words to express the sense of suffering, of pain that some of the spirits suffer. I have seen this statement before. It is unable to verbalize the suffering that he was going through. Um, and I think, yeah, anything else? Any comments?
Elmer, just out of curiosity, do we have a timeline from these two reincarnations that
Mm,
he pretty much
no,
have this awakening? Because it seems like pretty fast. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
no, I have no idea what is the timeline. I don't know. There is no chronological um, timing of those events from the time of his death when he came to the realization that he was actually dead to when he gave up on his rebelliousness and started praying. There is no, he doesn't mention it at all, so I won't be able to say if it was fast or if it was long.
But in more in the sense of him awakening to the truth that okay, I will accept uh, the task ahead. That my resignation because I fail, and I will just do whatever it takes to learn from my mistakes. This is
Yeah, for how long it took, I
it,
have no idea.
that was from one reincarnation to the other, right? It was like back to back, pretty much. Yeah, right.
Yes,
Okay,
that's right. Yeah,
okay, yeah,
that's on back to back
okay.
because
Daniela has a question.
My
okay.
question would be like, why his next incarnation had to be harder since he had already that, or maybe it was just because of that weakness. Like, if it was so hard for him to handle the first time, the chance for him to fail badly again, it's greater if the incarnation is supposed to be harder and not a little bit, or the same but not harder.
Well, he had an accumulation of factors going against him, right? One, he committed excesses that led to his blindness. So, as I've said, that the blindness that come upon him is an instrument to help him to come to his sense. Instead of being an instrument to come to his sense, he used it as an instrument for to greater rebelliousness, to greater anger, to greater despair, and continue with his excesses. Okay, and then on top of that, he has another aggravant that is very serious. He committed suicide. We don't know what the cause of suicide. So he has a lot of things going against him
Mm-hmm.
that I think coming in with being blinded to any death at 40, death at 50 is pretty good. I think he got a good deal actually. And again, the spirit tells him that his next existence will be more difficult. No, he had a lot of aggravants for himself, a lot of things for him to clean up, especially the suicide. I don't think it could be the same or even less in the following incarnation. It has to be something really, really strong for everything that he owed the divine laws at that time.
And in the end, it's all cause and consequence. You know, he built his own future by his own actions, right? It's not that a more difficult incarnation is imposed on him. It's the consequence of his own wrongdoings, right? He created a more difficult situation for himself. You know, like a student that doesn't study for a test and that fails in the test. Should the student get an easier test next time, or they have to study? They have to take another test and or to repeat the class or things like that. So you know, it's more or less the same thing, right?
Yeah.
You create the consequences of your own actions.
Yeah, I actually do think that he actually got a good deal. I mean, he had an
Yeah.
opportunity to come in a decent family, be educated, to go through a lot of things. I mean, benevolence worked a lot in his favor here, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, the fact is cause and consequence. It's how much damage he caused to his own perispirit, and all of those things to take into consideration. We don't know what was the means that he used for his suicide. Let's assume there's something related with the hearing. So he didn't get a bad deal, actually, in my opinion.
Daniela has a question again.
From maybe my perception is not all correct, but it seems that from most of the cases we have been reading in the book, the spirits that couldn't handle whatever situations they had in a specific incarnation, or messed up badly, or couldn't, evolve, got stuck, or gave up, like in his case, it looks like mostly the next incarnation, the package gets like really intense. Like, okay, we are going to give you a chance to clean up all at once. So it's like cleaning a pan, like, like a very crusted, dirty pan, like all at once, instead of leaving with some water to the next day, and then you clean up and then you shine it. It's like one time, as much as you can do to get a better situation in the future. It doesn't seem that it spreads out and then you tackle 2 or 3 things at a time, or the main issues. What I mean.
Yeah. What you are referring primarily to the last part of the cases, right? Which is the earthly expiations, right? Because if you go back to the other ones, or the suicidals, or the rebellions of spirits, we don't have that information. Here we have this information, this last part.
Yes.
And what we can see here is that all those spirits, they were ready for this next reincarnation. They were ready to deal with the bag that was given to them, right? They could handle this, otherwise they would not get it. Okay, and again, to me, the way I see it, there is actually immense amount of benevolence, the divine law, that the trials that they face, although extremely difficult, don't take me wrong, could be actually worse for the fault that they committed in previous existence. Could actually be even worse than what they deal with. Okay, but they were well prepared. They look for the opportunity to be able to come and clean up their act, so to say. Okay, and again, most important, in those cases that you see over here, those are spirits that were able to fulfill the so-called plan. They were able to do it, what was prepared for them. They keep up with the syllabus that was given to them, so to say, right? At least in this passage, but you can understand that many of us come in with that plan and you cannot handle. I mean, you change our mind when we are here. We deviate from the plan completely. This example that we have here are those who actually accepted a pretty heavy load and were able to carry it with dignity. But many of us, we ask for it, but when it's time to do it, they say, "Nah, that's too much. I'm gonna leave some of that for the next incarnation." Those examples that you have again, the ones that say, I'm not gonna call them completers, but at least they were able to carry on what was expected from them. But I don't know how many of us are actually doing that. How many of us are actually fulfilling that so-called plan? Those guys, the example that we have here in the last case, all of them, if I remember correctly, they are able to carry the load. And again, it is a great example in this case that what Emmanuel tells us, we can learn everywhere, but you progress in our level today in the physical world, in a physical existence. That's the importance of reincarnations for us. You could say that he learned over there, he understood it over there. Now, go over there, go back on earth, and transform that learning in yourself, into action. That is truly progress. So he comes in and he's going to face a very difficult trial to really integrate the knowledge into himself. Okay?
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
It's finished.
Thus,
Yeah.
okay. Thus, I returned to earth under the conditions you are aware of. It wasn't difficult for me to be good because I wasn't evil by nature. I had revolted against God, and God had punished me. I returned with an inborn faith, and that is the reason why I no longer complained against him, but rather accepted my dual infirmity with resignation and as an expiation which had to have its origin in sovereign justice. I felt no desperation during the isolation of my closing years, for I had faith in the future and in God's mercy. The isolation was very beneficial because during that long night, wherein all was silence, my soul more freely uplifted itself to the eternal, foreseeing the infinite through thought. When my exile was finally over, the spirit world provided me only with splendors and infallible delight. In comparison with my past, I deemed my situation relatively very happy, and I give thanks to God for it. However, when I look to the future, I see how distant I still am from perfect bliss. I have completed my expiation, but I must still make reparations. My latest existence was only profitable to me alone, and now I hope soon to start a new existence where I can be useful to others, thereby repairing my previous uselessness. Only then will I be able to advance on the blessed path open to all spirits of goodwill. That, that is my story, my friends. If my example can help to enlighten any of my incarnate brothers and help them avoid the plight into which I had fallen, I will have begun to repay my debt. Joseph.
Thanks.
Okay.
So very important here, and to complement Daniela's question, the Spirit says that it wasn't difficult for me to be good because I wasn't evil by nature.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a big thing over here. He already had the necessary tools to be able to accomplish, to be able to go through those difficult trials, because he wasn't really a very ignorant individual. He already had something in his baggage. He revolted against God, and God, what he says, punished me. Gave him the opportunity, offered him necessary tools for him to reflect back of what he is doing, and instead he did not use those instruments properly. And by instrument, I'm saying is anything that happens to us. In his case, blindness, secondary to whatever, secondary to diabetes or anything else, right? But those are tools that God presents us for us to use, for us to grow as a spiritual being, because that God is not really concerned, at least philosophically speaking, with one incarnation. One, to me, as my comparison, reincarnation is one day at school. Out of a 4 years course for to graduate or something, one bad day at school, it's bad enough, but it goes away, you know. And that's the way I like to see one reincarnation, one day at school. You go home, spend the night with dad, do a little homework, come back the next day. That's how I see reincarnation. the difference the next day is 65 years, 7 years between reincarnation for us at this point. So he came in and need to deal with some difficulties that he imposed upon himself, did not make good use of it, but he wasn't a bad person at all. So he had enough to deal with that reincarnation. And important that even the the tools that he given to him that could be an instrument for his rebelliousness, the isolation that he calls the isolation being the blindness and death, was actually an instrument to help him to cope with that reincarnation. That he used that, as he says himself, uh, the isolation was very beneficial because during that long night, wherein all was silence, my soul more freely uplifted itself to the eternal. So that is the case of make lemonades out of a lemon, right? Somebody gave lemons, what do you do with that to make lemonades? That's the classic case of someone who had all the reasons to go mad, go rebellions, this thing is too sour. He made use of that thing as an instrument to uplift himself. That's a sign of someone who's really working hard of progressing, of making himself better. And then on the second paragraph is extremely important that it says that reincarnation, that was for me. I was the sick guy who needed to be treated. I didn't have I didn't have enough to do anything for someone else. That was all about me. That is something that in our fraternal assistance very often I talk to people, now this is your time. You are going to this difficulty. You deal with that back. You make yourself strong, you heal yourself, then you can think of others, then you can help others. But if you are sick right now, you cannot help someone else. You have to cure yourself first. Then you can go and help someone else. Here's a classic case that one entire incarnation for this guy was for him. He needs to treat himself. He needs to take care of himself. And he has the realization that in order to really go to the highest field of existence, to be a truly uplifted spirit, he has to be about others. And that's the knowing the concept of Christianity is right there, the teaching of Christ right there. It's about the others. But in order for me to take care of the others, I must take care of myself first. I have to heal myself before I can heal others. It's the classic case in the airplane that João always uses. They tell you put the mask on your face first, and then you put the mask on your child or someone next. He had to put the mask on his face first. He did it. He's breathing well, and now he's ready to think about going back and devote his next reincarnation in the assistance of others. And that is a very eloquent and elevated thought of this spirit.
Daniela?
Yeah, it makes more sense now. Following up my question and your answer, that having it harder the next time for him, physically affecting him, and being all about his healing, it makes more sense now, because that healing process was necessary. Sometimes it is necessary.
Correct.
And if you don't have it hard at this level, and then you might be in between, or reaching out for help, trying to help others, or live in a way that might take away your own time for healing. That's I think now it clarifies really well what I was formulating in my question.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm glad.
It's really cool.
I'm glad. Okay, any more comments or more questions?
Yeah, I have a comment.
Sure.
Yes. It's always the same.
No,
But
it's never the same.
yeah, it is because For example, the last lesson with the little girl, I get it because she was in an ascendant path. Let's put that way. But this case that it's such a turnaround. It's me experiencing these rare things. It's still amazing me, and I'm kind of not as hard to accept, but I still think of it that because he come to one reincarnation, acts crazy, do all the excesses, kill himself, go to the spiritual realm, repentant, and next incarnation he's a good guy and accepts and everything and redeem himself. It's just it's. I mean, where was this guy in the incarnation that he committed all the excesses and killed himself? So I don't know if there was a trigger that make him do that or whatever. We don't know the whole story as you being mentioned, but to me, such a turnaround like those is just I get myself thinking because it's not the average guy. It's
But in reality, it's not such a big turnaround as as you were saying, because he said himself he was not an evil person. Okay, he committed the excesses that lead to his blindness. Instead of accepting his resignation, he rebelled against God. And the rebellion was so strong that he committed suicide. So it was a accumulation of mistakes that he did only to himself, and that's another thing to consider over here. There is no relate over here that he was mean to others, he was bad to others. He was someone who is harming himself primarily, at least as much as we know over here. And then he realized, well, why did I do that? That was not a good idea. I don't think it's such a huge turnaround. I don't think it was, he went from, I don't know, if there is scale from 0 to 100, he went to 15 to 85. I think it's much closer than that. The gap was not that huge.
And also, we can change fast. It depends on our willingness to change, right? Just look at Paul of Tarsus. You can change from black to white in a second if something big happens to us. So, and we don't really know how long he spent in the spiritual world struggling for repentance, but eventually, when he repented, maybe the repentance and the experience was so big that he was willing and prepared to make a complete change, right?
Yeah, yeah. I don't think I agree with Renato that such a huge drastic changes. It's unlikely, but I agree with you. It's possible. I mean, God does not set a limitation of how much can you progress. You progress as far as you can go. You can go from almost to Christ in one incarnation. How likely is going to be? Basically, to me, impossible. If someone can do it, go ahead. No, there is no imposition on how much you can grow, how much you can learn. Most of us go step by step, but again, and the way he speaks, the way he starts his communication, declares himself as not a completely ignorant spirit. It's someone who really dropped the ball, who really make a serious mistakes in one incarnation. But there was not someone extremely ignorant. And only the way he speaks, only the way, because we recognize the quality of spirits through their language, right? That's what Kardec teaches us, right? His language speaks for himself. That he's someone with some moral and intellectual qualities already, who just deviated from the law badly, yes, in one incarnation, but found a way back to it.
I think, Elmo, that with this story, the difference I see is that, just like you explained, that he did it to himself. It was him. And in the other stories we've read, it's always somebody inflicting somebody else, hurting, doing wrong to somebody else. This is why this story is so different. It's the last story, but yet it shows you that, you know, we go through our lives. We all different, and we have to expiate different things in our lives. But this one is good. I believe that he wasn't. I think the strongest evidence here is he was not evil, and he did it all to himself. Actually, he didn't hurt anyone else. It was him himself. So, and now with what's going on in life now, how many are not doing that? You know, going through inflicting themselves. They're unhappy. But not hurting someone else, because the greatest law of all is do unto others what you want them to do to you. So he didn't hurt anyone out there. So it was him that he had to deal with himself, and I think that's why the story is so. Yes, he went through a lot. Yes, his suffering, but he wasn't a bad person. I don't think so. He had to grow through that, and then at the end, you see how he grew, and he's giving us the last word. You know, if he can help anyone, I hope he helped. He could have helped a lot of, and we read the story, so he did, and he came full circle. So, you know, it's not, life doesn't have to be that you have to hurt your brother and sister out there. Sometimes it's different strokes for different folks, we say sometimes. So, yes, he went through a lot, but somehow or other I see what the story is teaching us. You know, he look at yourself, help yourself, work with yourself, and you'll get there. So it's a beautiful story, different from the others.
Yep, so you come to the end of the book. I have said that to John quite a few times, and the first time that I started this book, I was bored to tears. Couldn't wait until this book was finished. This time around, I am sorry that it's finished so early. Only in 2 years
Right.
I did that. I'm ready to start all over again. This time
Right.
around, I really love this book. And I'm saying that because it may be the case to some of us, especially the first part. That is a lot of reading. It's long reading without cases, but it's absolutely great book. It seems to be the forgotten book of the codification, the ones that is the least mentioned and the least studied. But as we saw here, it's so valuable because it brings those vivid examples for us to see and discuss and see the application of everything that it is in the Spirit's book, everything that is in the gospel according to spiritual. We see it applied here in real life, in real spiritual life. So I think it's a great book for us to go back in the future.
Yes. Hope so.
But you already see on your screen what awaits for us next week.
Yep.
Okay.
We are done here.
All right. Who's going to do our final prayer?
We can do it.
Okay.
At the end of another great opportunity of learning, we lift up our hearts in gratitude to God our Father and provider of all things, for beloved Master Jesus Christ, for the good spirits, for the patience, for the indulgence towards our difficulties, for the inspiration and guidance. We ask, beloved Master, that we may be assisted, inspired throughout the week, to do our best to live in accordance to your teachings, to pass along all that we have learned from you with our behavior throughout the week. And in this time of difficulties that we are confronted with our own conscience, that we are being challenged to put greater effort in the application of your teachings, that we may be able to do so. May you peace pacify our troubled minds at this time. May the light of your gospel illuminate the pathway that leads to our happiness, peace, with our own conscience. Allow, dear God, that we may be able to be back here next week in good health, ready and willing to learn. And we ask permission to close this meeting. So be it.